in so many different ways, I learned on my mission more about how to trust God. Um, in a simple way was with language. Um, so my call was Portuguese speaking, but they don't have a Portuguese speaking area in the DC North Mission. The point of that was for the visitor center to use my language there. I'm not completely fluent in Portuguese, and they didn't put me through the Portuguese program at the MTC. They said I knew enough, but I was not confident with the language, and not having language study while I was there, it made me nervous sometimes when I needed to use Portuguese. But there were a couple of instances when it was pretty amazing just to see how when I just kind of trusted the Lord to take care of it, to convey the message of the Spirit, how I was able to speak better than I knew I was capable of, and how the Spirit was so strong. I remember teaching a young boy. His mother and his father were divorced. His mother had moved from Brazil to the U.S., and she had been here for a while, and he came to stay with her, to live with his mom now. And he didn't know English, and he wanted to know more about the church. His mom, who was a little less active, she wasn't able to really teach him very well. She was a comfort herself, and didn't feel like she could teach him everything. So he was coming to the visitor center, and I and another sister who also spoke Portuguese, she was fluent. She and I would kind of have those opportunities to teach him. And I remember the first time I was able to teach him the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we talked about everything that's entailed in that lesson. I remember talking about repentance, and I remember talking about we wanted to emphasize the reason was the love that God has for us, the reason why this is possible, the reason why we do everything. And we started talking about prayer, talking about how to get to know God. And as I was able to tell him about God, and how much he is a friend to us in Portuguese. And then we invited him to pray. And as he did, the Spirit just filled the room, even though most of those who were in the room who had brought him didn't understand Portuguese. And this boy, who I don't know if he had ever really prayed much before on his own, just began to cry. He was a 12-year-old young man. And it was so simple, but it was undeniable how he was feeling that love of God in his life at that time. And I was so grateful to be able to teach him a little bit about that. Also, along the lines of using language, this was on the streets. As we were going, we were contacting people on the road. There's a guy that my companion started talking to, and I recognized the accent. So I asked him, in Portuguese, if he was from Brazil, and he said he was, and he started speaking Portuguese at 100, miles per hour, and I, kind of slowed him down and said, hey, I'm still figuring out the language, I'm still learning, but I kind of muddled through a little bit of a contact, and it was near the beginning of my mission, I remember, and he didn't want to, learn anything about the missionaries. He's just like, no, I'm good, I'm fine, I don't want to know. So I asked him, it's like, okay, that's great. And then I said, would it be all right if I could just practice bearing my testimony in Portuguese to you? I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I did that, and I bore testimony about a modern prophet, and the guidance that that we receive through him. And I did it in Portuguese, and I could see his countenance change as the Spirit was there. As I just clearly testified as best as I could, and it was just so simple because I only knew so much, in the language. just to see how the way he was looking at us changed, as you could see that he had been touched by the Spirit. And he asked me about the prophet. And he said, where can I hear more about him, about what he has to say? So he didn't continue to meet with us, but he did. He did take that information to look into it a little bit more for himself. And again, it was when you trust the Lord, he gets the message across that someone needs to hear.